am Jacob from Lunar, and I'm here to talk about something that's close to my heart: how to make the cloud more sustainable. During the next 5 minutes, you'll learn how to eliminate carbon emissions from your Kubernetes clusters. But first, let's take a look at the problem that we are facing. The graph to the left shows the yearly emissions since 1990. We've been fighting carbon emissions for decades, but the emissions continue to increase. The gap between rhetoric and reality remains massive. As you can see on the bar to the right, power generation is still a major contributor to global emissions. Here's a quick look at the potential futures. On the x-axis we have time, and on the y-axis we have yearly emissions. It's a very grim outlook if we stick to business as usual. But limiting global warming to 2 degrees of Celsius requires rapid, deep, and immediate greenhouse gas emission reductions in all sectors in this decade. But where does cloud computing fit into all of this? Data centers account for 0.3 to 0.6% of global emissions. That might sound small, but when we're talking about global scale, it's quite huge. These emissions are primarily from power consumption and chip manufacturing. So what can we do about this? It turns out that the answer might be more simple than we think. Let me introduce you to an approach inspired by a certain Scandinavian country: the MYSTS approach. And the reason I love the MYSTS approach is because it's simple and effective, and it's the most simple and effective way to cut down your emissions in the cloud. And you're probably all wondering what it stands for. It stands for Move Your Stuff to Sweden. Because do we really care where our workloads are running? If we truly are cloud native, then let's just MYSTS, move our stuff to Sweden. And the reason we should MYSTS is simple. Sweden has an extremely sustainable power grid, with only 40 grams of carbon dioxide being emitted to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. That's almost 10 times as carbon efficient as the power grids in the US, Germany, and Ireland. So let's take a look at an example with an AWS compute instance called m6g.xlarge. This graph shows how much carbon is emitted to run this compute instance for 1 hour in the US, Sweden, and India. The blue area shows the emissions from server manufacturing, while the red area shows the emissions from powering the server in the specific country for 1 hour. By running an m6g.xlarge instance in Sweden instead of in the US or Ireland, you can cut emissions by 73%. That's a huge difference for such a small change. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't cost you a dime extra. It's actually more cheap to run this instance in Sweden than it is to run it in Ireland. I've spent the fall of 2023 researching how we can optimize Kubernetes cluster autoscaling for carbon efficiency. If you're unable to MYSTS, move your stuff to Sweden, then I suggest that you try out carbon-efficient cluster autoscaling. But while the MYSTS approach may sound a bit silly, I honestly believe it is the most effective way to reduce the carbon emissions of your Kubernetes clusters. I hope this inspired you to make the cloud a little greener. Thank you.